We have the sentence for Dominique Pellico, who was found guilty in the mass rape trial involving his wife over a period of nearly a decade. Let's get back to Melissa Bell, who's standing by for us at the courthouse in Avignon. Melissa.
Max, we've had over the course of the last 20 minutes or so, first of all, the verdicts delivered for the men, and it takes some time. You're talking about 50 men who are here in court today to hear their sentences. That of Dominique Pellico, which we've just learned, the man who was accused of recruiting these other men to rape his wife and filming the acts over the course of nearly a decade, he gets that maximum sentence of 20 years that was requested by prosecutors, 2/3 of which will have to be served in jail. He'll also be inscribed on a sex offenders registry. Little by little, we're going to get the rest of the sentences. Remember, again, this is a trial extraordinary in its nature, in its scale. So the judge is going through verdict by verdict and then sentence by sentence. So far, guilty verdicts for the men, and that we were really waiting to hear about Dominique Pellico, the architect of his wife's abuse over so many years, and it is the maximum sentence that he has now received. And each time we've heard fresh news outside the courthouse of verdicts being delivered, sentences being handed down. There have been cheers out here from many of those people who've come out day after day to support Gisèle Pellico, not just her courage to show their support for what she's gone through, but to thank her. As we watched her arrive earlier, this is what they were shouting: "Thank you, Gisèle, for having chosen to make this trial public and having chosen thereby, in her words, to see shame change camps and end up properly where it belonged, with the men sitting in that box today hearing their sentences read out." Max.
Do we expect to hear from Gisèle? She's obviously emerged, as you say, as this, not just a French icon and a heroine, but also a global one. People want to know whether or not she feels this is justice, because I think a lot of people already on social media are saying 20 years certainly wasn't enough.
I think Gisèle Pellico has really attracted the world's attention, partly, of course, for her act of choosing to make this public. She didn't have to. She requested it. There were a lot of implications involved in that, not least the witnessing day after day of the videos of what had been done to her. She chose that very bravely, but I think she's also touched a nerve because of the dignity with which she's done it. A great deal of humility as well. She said over and over again, "I am just a normal person." And in many ways, although she's at the center of this trial, in the heart of it, and the focus of so much attention, she's really insisted day after day that this isn't just about her. It's about the victims of all sexual abuse. And she's explained that that was why she'd chosen to make the trial public. In her words, she wants other victims of sexual abuse to say, if Madame Pellico could do it, could speak out, could ensure that shame was in the other camp, then I can too. So I think it is that bravery, it is the sense of what she's doing for others that has touched a nerve. And also, I think the fact that this case doesn't just shine a very harsh light on these particular men and their particular acts and guilt. It also shines a light, perhaps more importantly, on societal questions. The question of how so many men could have thought it was okay to turn out of a house, find a clearly unconscious woman, do what they did, and none of them ever take that further or report it or raise alarms about what might be happening to this woman. Again, these are acts that took place over nearly a decade, and the only reason the world found out was that one day Dominique Pellico was found in a supermarket trying to film up women's skirts, the contents of his phone then discovered otherwise. Gisèle Pellico might not have learned of it, the world might not have learned of what was done to her, and therefore these questions might not have ever been brought to light.
We're joined now by Sarah McGrath. She's Chief Executive of Women for Women France. I just want to get your initial reaction to the 20 years. I mean, I can't see anyone on social media that seems to agree with it.
Well, look, it's the maximum sentence. I'm just learning with you about the sentence. And if you had caught me a couple of minutes earlier, you would have seen my eyes red with tears. I was very, so basically they got what they asked for. So in France, 20 years is the maximum sentence that can be passed down for this kind of crime. France is quite notorious for having really quite lax sentencing. You know, we often see cases of really horrific crimes against children of the sexual nature and women, and we see sentences like 6 months and 1 year and 3 years. And so France is notorious for that. But I think given how extraordinary this case and the fact that it is attracting global attention, yeah, we're seeing penalties that are usually a little bit harsher than they usually are.
Obviously, in no circumstances is rape ever acceptable, but what they've effectively done, haven't they, is say, you know, you can get sentenced 20 years for one rape. This was multiple hundreds of rapes. So those two cases wouldn't be comparable, and yet they are because of the nature of the French law. Do you think there'll be a lot of pressure for them to change it?
You know, that's where the cultural difference comes into play. I mean, I'm Australian. I live in France and have done for a long time. I know Americans have a similar expectation as Australians. I think this is considered quite normal in the French culture. So there isn't calls for harsher penalties, but there are calls for legal changes and justice system reform. We have a really problematic justice system when it comes to trying cases of this nature. Women in France simply don't trust the French justice system. Only 10% of victims of rape even report the rape to the justice system. Only of those reports, only 1 to 4% end up with a conviction. So when victims say they don't trust the justice system, I completely am with them on that. And so also even when we do have good judges and great evidence, you know, some of our laws are really outdated. So for instance, when it comes to domestic abuse, we don't even have very specific domestic abuse laws. We've just got the same laws that we use to prosecute violence in the general public that we use to then prosecute complex domestic abuse cases. So I think there will be a lot of call for legal reform. I think there'll be a lot of call for justice system reform and also more resourcing of the justice system, because a lot of victims wait for 5 years longer waiting for a court date, and they can't rebuild until they've been heard by a judge and had justice handed down. So yeah, there will be calls in that regard.
Isn't this one of the great contributions that Giselle has given to France and the world, because she waived her anonymity, which allowed us to report on the case and the detail in a way that must have been absolutely horrific for her, but you know, also shed a light on the justice system that you're describing.
Exactly. You know, we have to remind ourselves that she wasn't, it was a choice to make it public. And she's done that in service of other women. You know, it's absolutely horrific what she's been going through. She's so brave. But before I heard that when the verdicts were handed down, she looked at each perpetrator in the eye. And I just think this woman is incredibly strong. But shining a light on these French justice system problems and just societal attitudes as well. I think quite often internationally, France can have a really sort of reputation of being really progressive when it comes to women's rights. And that is the case. We've just had, you know, the right to an abortion put into the constitution, which is a great move forward. However, when it comes to sexist and sexual violence, we really do lag behind our other European neighbours.
One of the other really shocking moments of the trial was the defence of some of the other men that were recruited by Dominique Pellico and their defence. So some have obviously pleaded guilty. Those who are pleading not guilty have said in their defence that they thought it was a consensual sex game, despite the fact that she was clearly completely unconscious. And, you know, do you think those men really believed that? And if they did, I mean, there's a massive problem, isn't there, within that community?
Yeah. Do I believe them if they're sincere? Look, to be honest, I just simply don't know. Some of the comments really stood out to me from some of the perpetrators. One man said, "I didn't think it was rape, given I didn't force her." One man said, "I'm the real victim in this situation because I didn't know I was being filmed." So this man who made that comment, he obviously understands the nature of consent, because he said, "Well, I didn't give my consent to be filmed." but he didn't get consent from Giselle. So he obviously understands the notion. But I do think more widely, the notion of consent is something that hasn't really in French society, it's only just starting to get a bit of visibility. France was the country that blocked at a European level the idea of consent being across the board in European laws. That would be the notion of rape. And so I think in French society, yeah, there needs to be a lot of education starting in schools about what consent is, and then obviously there is a debate open at the moment around putting consent into the French Penal Code.
Sarah McGrath, thank you so much for bringing us your thoughts on that breaking story. And as you were speaking, we saw that, you know, some of the defendants there completely covered up, protecting their own anonymity, which again just speaks to the bravery, doesn't it, of the real hero here, which was Giselle. Thank you.